What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into Body Studios. Now, today in the studio, we're working on a sculpt and a paint for the Niffler diorama project. Now, if you're keeping up with the channel, a few weeks ago, I had released the full-length content of me creating this little guy. We've created a few videos along the way in just like kind of like highlight full-length clips apart from the main actual content video, and those can be found under those playlists, whether it be the Wizarding World or the Niffler Beast. Pretty cool, right? He turned out to be a great little guy, but I think he's just missing a little bit of something. Now, in some of those previous videos, I had mentioned that I may be making some accessories for the Niffler to have or hold, and we've already got all sorts of varieties of treasures for him to have in his little nested diorama. But I just feel like we need a little bit extra gold. So in doing so, and in the spirit of making treasure, we're going to be using Sculpey Original to sculpt and paint a crown for this little guy. Whether it be a crown for him or a bracelet for us, proportionally, it's going to be pretty cool. Now, the challenge for this video is we're going to be using Sculpey Original in a pre-made mold, demolding it, and then curving it in a circular pattern for the crown before baking it. It's actually a little bit more challenging than you would think. You don't want to get any cracks or any kind of distortions as the item is baking, so there are some limiting factors in what you can do when you try to curve clay. Now sit back and enjoy as we go ahead and take on this challenge and see what we can create here in the studio. What do you think, little guy? Is it time to give you a crown? Let's get to it. Now, as you can see, guys, I already have one of these awesome little crowns sculpted out. Now, although they are almost the bracelet size, we are going to refer to them as crowns. Again, this is a Sculpey Original video, so I had already placed the Sculpey Original into the mold. I demolded it, I put it in circular motion, and I just laid it on the parchment paper here, ready to be slid onto an aluminum pan to bake. So there's some different techniques and things that you can do to make yourself more successful with this. But as you can see, here is the mold that we're using. It is pretty wide overall, and we're going to do some trimming on it here and there just to create different shapes and dimensions. I have quite a few of these little molds that would kind of be well equipped for a crown for the size of the Niffler. But we're going to try to stick to one design in general, just so we can kind of keep all of them kind of looking the same. So in this video, we're going to be sculpting two of these out of Sculpey Original. And I'm trying my best to make sure that they sit vertical and they're a perfect circle. And I'll be honest, guys, I did have a little bit of trouble with this. They wanted to warp and move a little bit just because of their shape. But we're going to try to see if we can refine the process overall and get a even more symmetrical and perfect kind of mold out of this Sculpey Original project, as well as a future creative paper clay project. So I do intend to do another series or another little video of this, and I'll be using a different type of clay. So you'll be able to kind of jump into that video right after this one, but we'll be using a different type of clay, and it has its own gives and takes. It has some benefits and some negatives to it. So we'll kind of go through that in that video. We're going to go ahead and push this into the mold here very, very roughly. I just want to make sure that it gets into all of the grooves of the mold and there's no air pockets or any voids. Kind of pushing that in with the palm of my hand there, making sure really to push that in. And then I'll take just a kind of a dull scrape blade and I will just scrape off any excess on the top of the mold. So we'll trim that down a little bit, make sure we can get pretty much a smooth back to the actual crown themselves. I'm not really worried about the interior of the crown, like texture. I'm not really thinking that that's going to be too much of like an eye draw. But I will kind of tinker with it along the way later on in the process. So here we are. You can see it's nice and smooth, and it's not perfect, but it's pretty good overall. All right, so here we are with a new piece of parchment paper. I literally ripped it off, so don't judge my harsh pull line on that. It doesn't really matter. It's going to get literally covered in paint throughout the process anyway, so it's no big deal. Look how seamless that is. We pulled that off in one beautiful segment here. Look how great this thing looks. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use an X-Acto knife throughout all of the process for these crowns, and we're going to remove different portions of the clay. Now in the one that I had made a few moments ago before I began this content, you saw that I had taken off quite a bit. So we have these little lifted laurettes that are coming off of the main circular crown shape. So this version here is going to keep those. So I'm cutting this just a little bit less away than I did in the previous one. But you can see it's just still an easy process just to satisfyingly cut the Sculpey original away. If you leave a little bit of a lip or a little bit of a taper on that, then there's no big deal. You could spend like an hour or two really sculpting or cutting away what you want to. But you really don't have to work hard to get a really good, cool, defined edge with a sharp X-Acto knife. It's really satisfying. You just got to think about how the X-Acto knife is cutting or pulling on the clay, because we don't want to distort the actual crown, flat shape too much before we kind of break into curving this for the baking process. I'm also going to go in and I'm going to remove these little nodes. So it's easier to do this when it is not cured. And I'm going to come back again to this later on in the next video when we make a refined version of these. And I'll kind of explain what my mind's eye is and why I didn't kind of pull those off on those other crowns. We'll get to that later. So here I'm using a little bit of rubbing alcohol here. It's actually eyeglass cleaner, but I got a little kit of it from the eyeglass or the eye care center. So I'm like, I'm going to use it. Why not, right? Free is free. So we're going to go ahead and use this. I'm using a silicone tip tool. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in particular areas. I'm just going to smooth out some of these harsh edges where I kind of pulled and cut and tugged the clay away. If it didn't give me a clean cut, then this helps to refine that process. Now you will notice that this crown that we were creating right now is a little bit deeper than the one previously, and that's just part of the process. It's completely okay. Now that clay is actually the bag of clay at the very beginning of the video. It's been used 1,000 times by my children, and in doing so it's just worn and desaturated of oil. Because it is a polymer clay, they were able to use it over and over again, and it wasn't causing any problems, right? But the problem is when you go in to use it or curve it, it needs to be really kind of like supple and conditioned and really, it needs to be able to move. And when you condition it and then let it set for so many times in a row, it creates a brittleness in the clay. And that's what we had. So as I curved this into a circular motion, it started to crack and bend and buckle. So this was just not going to cut it. So although I put a little bit of work into it, I just had to cut my losses and just kick it to the curb. Now, I did pull out a brand new brick of Sculpey Original, and I went ahead and created a whole new one exactly the same way. And that's what we'll be picking up with for the rest of the video. So just be aware, we always make mistakes. I tried to use what they were using and kind of just like junky clay. It just didn't work out. Now what we're going to do now is I'm going to sculpt a few little gems. I was really kind of experimenting with whether or not I wanted to either paint the gems or create little two-part epoxy gems. And I decided to go ahead and try this out. Now for some reason, although I am using Tim Holtz alcohol inks, and they turned out pretty good overall, the type of mold that I'm using here didn't really give a glossy surface. It gives like a more of a matte finish. It's really no big deal because I do plan on clear coating it, which means that all of that would be kind of hidden away and it would still be like very glossy. But overall, I think that I do prefer the hand-painted method a little bit better, and I'll explain later on down the road why I like that just ever so much more. You can see I'm just going to make a few of these little pocket gems here and there throughout the process. I do create a lot of buttons along the very back row, which actually is like a little bracelet. And I'll only fill up the little divots, and all we're going to do is we're going to create a bunch of little gems and dots in particular places that I think that I may be able to use, whether it's in this project or later on down the road, to create like a little button or gem effect. So you can see I'm just literally letting 2 drops drop into each one. It does get a little bit of mess along the way. Now I also will say that the blue and the green were very similar in colors. so that you could, when you, and then especially once you put it on the gold background that we're going to be using for the base coat for these, they really blended out quite well, and you couldn't tell between the green and the blue very much, and it was almost so minuscule. If I could go back, I would probably use a lot deeper, a lot brighter blue instead of like a teal that I had used for this project. But it turned out pretty good overall, and I do use them a few throughout this process, so you'll see them reappear in a few moments. All right, so now as you can see, I've got the little crowns out of the oven now, and we have a little bit of warpage here. Now, because I didn't actually sit them on anything that would technically like keep them from buckling or contracting in the heating process, they kind of just set up the way they did. Now, obviously, they are a circular shape here, but they could be a little bit more refined. And I'm thinking that I might get a little bit more refinement out of the creative paper clay in the second video. So we'll kind of see when we get to that whether or not we can get a little bit better circular motion. I did get a little bit of cracking here and there, but that's no big deal. The overall strength of it is absolutely perfect. Pretty durable overall, you guys, and these actually will last a long time as long as you just don't literally throw them across the room. Here's the smaller one that I had made originally, and obviously they're the same shape. I just cut off more for the other one, and it also creates a lot like not as deep of a crown. It also looks a little bit more proportional to the size of the Magical Beast Niffler that we've been creating for this diorama. So you'll later on down the road, later on this video, I will show you what these both gold ones look like on the Niffler. And then, of course, again, we're going to go in and we're going to create some different ones in the second video. Now, the first one here that we are painting are actually going to be the same. They're both going to be the same painting process. I'm beginning with a antique bronze. And instead of using my normal Mars Black base coat, I'm just going straight over the bleached out white clay. So I'm just going to go right into it. It does mean I have to do an extra coat here. So as we work through this process right here, I'm just trying to mainly just make sure that the paint doesn't cake up in any particular areas that I really don't want it to. I want it to be as if the paint layers that we apply could help remedy any kind of divots or any kind of imperfections in the clay layers. You could spend literally hours working on getting an absolute perfectly symmetrical surface on your clay if you want to go for that. Like if you were making one of these, you could just spend hours on it, getting absolute perfection. You could get a perfect circle, perfect dimensions, no buckling between the top and the bottom of the crown. You could spend a ton of money like getting different real gems to inset into these or getting different molds to make different shapes. We're not going to really do that with this, right? We're just going to go ahead and just have some fun crafting, because what we're going to do is the best one, whoever votes for the best one, I may put a poll up on YouTube and TikTok for this, but you can just vote for the best one, and that's the one that will just sit on the Niffler, and then we'll just have the rest of these just either sitting around the studio or we'll have it actually put up on the Niffler itself. Look at me just conversing away with the voiceover here. Now, this is actually the second coat here, and this was an antique gold. So we're starting to increase our overall brightness. So we first went with a antique bronze for the nice dark base. Then we went into an antique gold. And now we're going to be working with the sepia. Now, this is a Dollar & Rowney ink, and I will water this down with a little bit of water from my brush. And then we're just going to brush this on as a nice wet wash. So we're going to go ahead and let this set into any of the nooks and crannies around these ornate little shapes. And we'll just kind of let that wash build up like it just has a lot of age and a lot of texture and a lot of just a lot of diversity in the overall color layers. And then the final layers and coats that we do on this will just brighten any of those like very high highlights and it will look really cool. We're also going to apply that to the interior of the crown as well. It's not as big of a deal, but it's cool just to make it look all the same. Then we're going to go in with an actual pure gold. This is an extremely vibrant color, and as you can see, it kind of like goes across the tops of the crown there. It's really giving it that really high level of shine that you would want if it was sitting on top of the Niffler, and then the light from the TV or the light from the light on the ceiling is shining down. It's going to hit that reflective layer, and it's going to look absolutely phenomenal. Now here are those two-part epoxy gems that we had created, and you can also see that the red actually turned out a little bit more orangish than I had anticipated, and the blues and the greens look very similar. We're also going to incorporate a few half pearls in the majority of all these crowns that we're creating, and it's just going to be applied to the clay structure with E6000. We want to make sure that E6000 doesn't really ooze too much out of the edges of whether it's a pearl or if it's a gem or if it's a piece of clay that I add to it. We don't want any of that seepage out. I'm using just a ball stylus tool to apply like a little divot of E6000, and then we're just putting a green and a red gem in each of the little like florets or the little flowers there. We're making sure that those are symmetrical and centered on those the best that I can. And it just brings up the overall look of that quite a bit. They look pretty good overall, and as yet I have not clear coated that, but when I do, they will get a little bit brighter and a little bit shinier. The pearls do look absolutely phenomenal, and the color combination that they give with anything that I add to the clay structures really does look great. They really glisten in the sunlight, and they're just next level. I had actually ordered a whole pack of these. They're actually like half pearls, and I ordered them from Amazon as a whole kit for like a Sanderson sister cup. So they really are beyond my expectations, and they just absolutely just fit perfectly with this type of project. Now, I will say that I did gold leaf the interior of these two clay structures. So both this one and the thick clay crown also got a gold leaf. So I'll kind of put that on with Mod Podge, let it dry for a few hours, and then I will just brush it off, and then I'll use my finger just to pat it down. I will clear coat these later on down the road, but it won't change too much of how they look, and I'm not really worried about that in this content video. It's literally just a layer of spray paint just to lock it all in, keep it protected, and then that's all there is to it. Looking pretty good, I would say. It's really coming along, and I'm really liking how these two gold crowns, or bracelets, right? And I guess those bracelets are turning out. Now, if the Niffler were to steal these crowns from an unsuspecting person, or a pocketbook, or off somebody's wrist, yeah, obviously it would be indeed a bracelet. Looking pretty good. Those little gems turned out pretty cool overall. The gold again behind those gems did change the color tone a little bit. But look how it looks on the little Niffler. How awesome is that? Now that is the thin gauge right there. And then we also have the thick gauge here, which I kept in a majority of a gold and a dirty wash look to it. We really leaned more on the pearls for this one. But I also went out of my way to kind of stick some of those little florets or leaves up and made a little spiky motion here. I was just experimenting and see how I could push the clay up in particular areas. Now, I will say that the Sculpey original is beyond strong, and it would definitely last, even in the circular motion that we had sculpted these into, which is the actual challenge for this video, as I stated in the very beginning. So I'm really happy with how they turned out. It's the first time I've ever, sculpted these crowns or bracelets, I guess, in not just that, but also a circular motion. So we sculpted these and then attached them and then let them bake in a circular motion. Of course, curving clay is not easy, but we are here to do it. I think these little crowns turned out absolutely spectacular. Again, we made a narrow one as well as a thick one, and they both have their benefits. Of course, remember, we also created those out of Sculpey original with a pre-made mold. We curved those into the overall shape that we needed before we baked them, but we did not put them around anything to keep them in the shape of the circular crown. And we did get a little bit of warping and distortion. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It actually makes it a little bit easier for the overall shape of the Niffler's head to hold on to the crowns, like on it. so it's not necessarily a bad thing. Now there are some things that we can do as far as just applying a little bit of grip to the top of the bottom of the crown so that it actually holds on to the head a little bit better. But even if they're not perfect in some ways, and they do sit catty-cornered a little bit here and there, I'm completely okay with that. It makes it look like the Niffler just happens to have a bracelet or a crown just sitting off on its head at a catty-cornered angle. Like, look, you caught me, this is what I have on my head. I'm surrounded by gems and gold coins and emeralds and of course a pearl necklace as well, which he's stowing away in his pouch. So I think they turned out absolutely spectacular. Let's go ahead and get into the next video, guys. Now, in the next video, we'll be using creative paper clay, which will be in the creative paper clay playlist specifically, and we'll be able to get some different results with that clay. Remember that Sculpey original was a little bit thicker, it's a little bit more durable, it's heavier. So there are given benefits to each type of clay that we are using. I will mention the perks and the benefits of creative paper clay when we are creating those in a video similar to this one. So go ahead and sit back, guys. Make sure you click the video right here, and let's get into the next awesome piece of content. Later, guys.